Whenever my grandfather Bogle got into a conversation that allowed him to share his beliefs about dying, he always saw to it that everybody in the room understood that when it came time for his own death, he had one simple wish. "When I die," he used to say, "I hope I go quietly in my sleep like your Uncle Frank, and not screaming in terror like the passengers on his bus." It was one of his favorite jokes, and it never failed to get people thinking, even as they were laughing their faces off. A few years ago, I had a car accident that could easily have ended my life. As I was traveling down a Mississippi highway on my way to the Birmingham airport, I drove into a heavy rainstorm, a raging downpour. It was one of those storms that seemed to come from nowhere, but it had been raging for a while before I hit it. As I came around a bend in the highway, my Ford Taurus hit a large patch of water that had been accumulating for quite some time. The car began to hydroplane, and before I knew what had happened, I was headed for a head-on collision with a concrete guardrail. To avoid crashing, I threw the steering wheel in the opposite direction, which threw the car into a spin across the median, careening backwards while spinning clockwise like a boomerang into oncoming traffic. One car dodged me on my right, another just missed me on my left, and I lost complete control before I slid to a stop in a patch of grassy knoll in the middle of the interstate. I will always remember the sequence of sounds: a sudden deluge of raindrops hitting the roof, the sound of tires turning into water skis, and then 10 seconds of what sounded like a pressure washer hitting the car from 6 separate directions before everything went absolutely silent. 3 opportunities to die spectacularly presented themselves in less than 10 seconds. But somehow, for no apparent reason, I survived. That experience got me thinking. I guess anytime you come face to face with a near-death experience, it gets you thinking. You pay attention in a different way. You start to notice things you haven't seen before. Not because they haven't been there, but because you haven't been looking for them. And one of the things I've started to notice is the incredible variety of spectacular ways there are to die in this world. Some folks don't just kick the bucket. They take the bucket, put it on a tee, they line it up with the end zone, they back up, run towards it, and kick the bucket so straight and so hard that it doesn't just split the uprights, it soars over the restraining net, deep into the stands, before it kills 3 spectators. Some people obliterate the bucket, and when they do, they become my heroes. Guys like Jim O'Brien. When I was a kid growing up in Philadelphia, Channel 6 Action News had a one-of-a-kind weatherman named Jim O'Brien. He came from Waco, Texas, but something about the guy allowed him to become more authentically Philadelphian than people who had lived here their entire lives. Jim O'Brien was zany, Jim O'Brien was funny, but most of all, Jim O'Brien was popular. He anchored Action News at noon. He did the weather at 5, 6, and 11. He hosted a news magazine on Saturday nights called Prime Time and a daily game show called Dialing for Dollars, which had to be one of the dumbest shows in the history of television. The game was stupidly simple. Someone at the station cut a phone book into strips of 10 numbers at a time. An audience member would draw one of these strips out of a bin, and then the count, something like 7 from the top or 4 from the bottom, would be used to determine which phone number Jim O'Brien would dial. If you got a call from Dialing for Dollars and could tell Jim O'Brien the count and the amount, you would win the jackpot, which was usually around $250. This was not The Price is Right or Deal or No Deal. It was stupid, it was lame, and it was boring. But with Jim O'Brien as the host, it was also zany, funny, and boy was it popular. Jim loved riding motorcycles and jumping out of airplanes, and he was an expert at both of these activities. But on a beautiful Sunday morning in September of 1983, it all came to a screeching halt when Jim O'Brien met his untimely end in a spectacular way, a skydiving accident. It was shocking, it was sad, a real loss to the Philadelphia community. But to high school kids, Jim O'Brien's death became the inspiration for a series of spectacular jokes. People would take their shoes off, turn them upside down on the ground, and ask, "What's this?" The answer was, Jim O'Brien. How do you know Jim O'Brien had dandruff? They found his head and shoulders in the bushes. What was the last thing to go through Jim O'Brien's mind before he died? His feet.